The grain stores are running dry. Warehouses like these feed the most desperate in the Somali region of eastern Ethiopia. But this country is facing a multitude of crises, pushing it to the edge of famine. What food there is still on sale, like here in Jijiga market, is becoming increasingly unaffordable.
waxaan ku kolkii hore waxaan siisan jirnay 30 ama 25 ma siisan jirnay waxaan ku leeyay kana ka oo yar baan 40 siisanaa ya annaguna ama 5 riyaal baan dul dhiganaa kor socotada miyiga ayaa noo keeni jiray dadkaas aan ka iibsan jiray dadkiina abaara ku dhacay waxba imka lama helo.
But it's not just the crippling drought which is making this market run dry. A conflict in the fertile north of the country means crops are not being cultivated. Food inflation being felt around the world is at 44% here, meaning that many just cannot afford to eat. And then there is the war in Ukraine.
Ukraine saameyn aad u ballaaran buu ku yeeshay caalamka noloshiisa oo dhan, gaar ahaan Afrika, gaar ahaan annaga ka dal ahaan Ethiopia. daqiiqda caadiga ee 80% la isticmaalo cuntadu ay u badan tahay waxay nooga yimin jirtay Ukraine.
Ahmed Mohammed imported grain from places like Egypt and Turkey, which originated in Ukraine. But with supply drying up because of the war, those countries are no longer exporting.
Si badan baa jirta in sidan hadda ay wax ku socdaan inaynu ku sii socon karin waa inoo muuqataa, laakiin meel aan kaga noqono ama kaga istaagno ma laha. waxaan weysay wax u socdaan haddii Ilaahay subxaanahu wa ta'aala wax keeno bedel khayr qaba ama degdeg wax aysan imanin, dhibaatooyin badan baa laga baqayaa inay dhibaatada hadda jirta tu ka ballaaran inay wadanka ay saamayso.
For those already struggling to survive, the situation getting worse means starvation.
gaajin wuxuu dambaysan ayaan ku jiraa wax tab kala saaraya ma jirto waan habeen qadaynaa waayada la iska dhimcisnaana 3 koor baa xil karsan jiray eegana walaal macluun nooc inuu dambaysan noogu jirta tab kala ma saarayo.
Many here have already been displaced from elsewhere in the region, like Sado's neighbor Amina Abdi. She used to have around 60 goats and cows, all died due to the drought. Now she relies on family members here, but they too are on the edge of starvation.
nafta u baan dadka wali ka bixin reerahan waxaan ku dhibaato adduunyada ku badaa dawladda Ethiopia waxaan ka codsanaynaa Ilaahay saaka inuu iyagana noo soo wax Ilaahay noo heli karaan inana siiya aan uga baahanahay hadda baa loo dhibaataysan dhibaato adag baa joogta inaga soo gaadhaan xoolo ma jiraan dadkiiba imika naftii dadka weeyaan dabka lama saarayo wax dabka saaraa ma jiro.
But the government stores are almost empty too.
bakhaarka wuu buuxi jiray haa maalmaha qaarkood waxa weeye bakhaarka baabuurtu way la taagnaan jireen rarka.
From warehouses like this, Ahmed Yassin Sheikh Ibrahim, head of the government's disaster management team, feeds around 30,000 families struggling to survive. But now, the combination of drought and the war in Ukraine is making his job impossible.
markii abaar dhacday ee ay saamaysay 3 milyan iyo 300,000 bay si toos ah waxay u baahnaayeen food assistance macna inay si maalinle ah cunto loo siiyo. waad garan karaysaa marka dad intaa leeg markaad cuntadooda aad waliba dibadda ka keenayso waad garan karaysaa miisaaniyadda ku baxayso waad garan karaysaa waxyaalahan marka macna cerealka oo dhan badankoodu majority-goodu wuxuu ka iman jiray Ukraine ka iman jiray sidoo kale saliidda aan waxay ka iman jirtay halkaas ka iman jirtay marka taas waxa way joogsataa hadda wixii imanay cid kale oo supplier-ana wali lama helin.
Once these supplies run out, there will be nowhere for the most desperate to turn in a country teetering on the edge of famine.
Well, joining me now is Fahan Haq, who is the Deputy Spokesperson for the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres. Thanks very much for joining us this evening. You have displaced people there. The drought is killing their cattle. They are on the edge of starvation. Your boss, the Secretary-General, today described this move as a beacon of hope. What will it practically mean for the people we've just been hearing from?
In terms of practicalities, what it means is that there's been a stockpile of food, in particular grain, but also other foods and fertilizers that have been held in Ukraine. Right now, as a result of this agreement, there's 3 Ukrainian ports in the Black Sea, Odessa, Chernomorsk, and Yuzhny, which will now be able to be used as places from which the food can now be exported. There'll be safe lanes set up so that Ukraine is able to essentially guarantee the safety of ships going through their waters. And then Turkey, with the assistance and support of the United Nations, will handle inspections of the ships. But the bottom line in terms of the food crisis is that essentially we expect that some 4 million tons of grain and food will reach commercial markets every month as a result of this initiative. And that in turn will help to lower global food prices and then put the affordability of food back within the reach of millions of people around the world.
I mean, there is no doubt about how desperate the need for this plan to work is when you look at the situation in Ethiopia. That grain needs to get moving and moving fast to some of the poorest countries in the world. Practically speaking, what sort of timeline are we looking at?
We're trying to get the system up and running as soon as possible. There's meant to be a joint coordination committee under the auspices of the United Nations that will help facilitate this export. We want to get that up and running in the next few days. The Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, is hoping that within the next 2 weeks at the outset, we would be able to get food moving and actually send it out into the world.
I mean, aid organisations, some of them have been sceptical that this will make a big enough difference quickly enough. One aid worker told us that Ukraine was fuel on the fire, but the fire was already burning. And you see it in places like Ethiopia, where there is drought, there is conflict, there is huge inflation. How confident are you that this will work quickly enough to save lives?
Well, there's no doubt that this will in itself help to lower food prices, which is one of the problems that the world's has been facing. And there's no doubt that bringing more food, and particularly more grain, more edible oils, and also fertilizer for crops out into the markets will help ensure that people don't starve to the rate that we would otherwise be fearing.
But people will still starve.
However, yeah, my point to you, there was a food crisis before the Ukraine war. So the impact of the Ukraine war, in other words, made it worse and created essentially a perfect storm for the prospects of world hunger. And yet, resolving this part of it solves a piece of the puzzle. But there were food problems, including problems caused by climate change, caused by drought, caused by the supply chain effects from COVID-19 that have already been there. And those are also still problems. And we still need to deal with that. And therefore, on top of this, we will need to have a huge amount of aid go out to places such as particularly the Horn of Africa, given the drought there, to make sure that people don't go hungry.